Hey guys, Wormy Horror here. The following 5 stories are true to the best of my knowledge and can be found on the subreddit Let's Not Meet. If you like the following stories, please make sure to leave a like, a comment, or subscribe, especially if you'd like to keep updated with the channel. Without further delay, here are 5 true creepy stories. Back when I was 16, I had had a rough time with my father and his girlfriend for about a year or so. But I was trying to mend my relationship with my father. So when I was offered to go on vacation with them, along with my siblings and step-siblings, I said yes, after having thought about it for more than a month. We went to Turkey. We would be living at an all-inclusive resort that was aimed at Scandinavians, so there would be a lot of people we could talk to. The first few days were perfectly fun. I was swimming in the sea and the pools at the resort. Only creepy thing there was a waiter who grabbed my hand and slipped me a napkin with a message of meeting up with him later. He spent the next couple of days lurking around me every time we would go eat until my father saw how uncomfortable I was and told him to buzz off. But one day, my stepmother decided that we should take a girls' day of shopping, which meant my sister, my 2 stepsisters, her, and myself. I didn't really like the idea, but decided to come along anyways, so off we went to the nearest bazaar. We spent about an hour there until we got to a small place that looked sketchy, but they seemed to have some clothes that my stepsisters wanted to look at, so we went inside. I remember there were 3 men there, 2 older ones and then a young one in the beginning of his 20s. He called himself Oscar. I remember because that's the name of my dog. We were seated and they brought out Turkish tea and such to make us feel at home while we were looking at dresses and the like that they wanted us to try on. In the end, I was pressured into trying one and went into the dressing room. While I was there, Oscar came and asked if all was well. Thinking it was just good customer service, I answered that it was fine. He must have understood something else, because he slipped into the dressing room, and before I could do anything, he had cornered me with his hands on my cheeks and leaned in to kiss me. My body froze, despite my brain telling me to scream and punch him. It took me half a minute before I managed to pull back and tell him to stop. I pushed him out and changed faster than I ever had. Once I got out, I asked my sister if we could leave, whispering what had happened. She nodded and had to force my stepmother to get ready, because she was enjoying all the compliments. Once we were out of there, my stepmother was scolding me for making a scene. My sister told her what had happened because I was a sobbing mess. What was her reaction? She grabbed my arm and said, "Do not tell your father," before she let go and marched out of there. I didn't feel like leaving the room the rest of the vacation. And stupid as I was, I didn't want to piss my father off, so I didn't tell him. To this day, he doesn't know what happened. To this day, my stepmother is still pissed at me for ruining that vacation. In the mid-90s, my parents took my older brother and I on vacation to Cancun, Mexico when we were teenagers. Me, 13, and my brother, 18. My brother and I shared a room, and he was old enough to go out to the bars, leaving me alone in the room to watch movies and be bored out of my mind. My parents wanted to hang out with us the whole time, but we were too cool and tried to distance ourselves from them as much as possible. I was mature for my age, had previously had some underage drinks with friends, and felt that I was old and cool enough to go to the downtown bars of Cancun. When I asked my brother if I could join him, he laughed at me and told my parents, so I was bitter that I was stuck in my room, or worse, forced to hang with my folks. The 3rd or 4th day into our vacation, I was sitting at one of the hotel bars, nursing a Shirley Temple and feeling sorry for myself. A woman, nicely dressed in her mid to late 20s, sat down next to me and we started chatting. I don't remember the details of what we talked about. I just remember her being really interested in what I had to say, and she made me feel like I was really mature for my age. What 13-year-old me really craved. We made arrangements to meet at the resort bar the next day to hang out some more. The next day, we met at the resort lounge at lunchtime and hung out. She listened to my stories about how BS it was that I couldn't go out drinking, and sympathizing, she offered to get me alcoholic drinks. After 3 to 4 drinks, I was getting pretty drunk, and this was when she asked me if I wanted to go back to her room to hang out and watch a movie. Drunk 13-year-old me thought this was a great idea, as I was going to get more booze, and this cool 20-something chick wanted to hang out with me and thought I was super cool. Just as we were leaving the lounge, my mom appeared. She was meeting my dad at the pool. My mom doesn't know what's going on and thinks I'm heading back to my hotel room. However, drunk me proudly introduces my new friend to mom, telling her we're going back to this woman's room to watch a movie. My mom's face goes from, "Hi, how's it going?" to, "Get your ass up to your room right now." Mom told my new friend that she had no business inviting 13-year-olds back to her room and that she is not to talk to me again or my mom would call the cops. At that moment, I was so angry with my mom, but she had that "don't mess with me" look, and that I knew I had to keep my mouth shut. The next day, I was heading out to the pool and saw that woman sitting at the bar with 2 men in their late 50s, who I can only describe as menacingly scary. She pointed at me, and one of the men glared while the other winked at me. It sent shivers down my spine. My grandparents decided to take the whole family on a cruise at Christmas time around the Caribbean. There were 14 of us, so we were all located in different cabins, spread over different floors. My sister and myself, I'm female, shared a room. I was 16 and my sister was 14. On our first night, we could hardly sleep as the couple in the adjoining cabin were having a very loud argument. The man kept calling the girl a whore and shouted that she was only there because of his money. It went on until the early hours of the morning. After that night, all was quiet, and I assumed that the girl had moved to another cabin, as I never saw or heard her again. The next day, we were up early for breakfast. I was keen to explore the ship with my sister. But my sister was taking a while to get ready. I thought that if I waited in the corridor, that I would encourage her to hurry up. While I was waiting in the corridor, I heard the next door opening, and I couldn't help but take a look to see who the man was that had been doing all of the shouting. He looked at me, and his eyes lit up straight away. This horrible feeling came over me. I now know is gut instinct. I just knew from the way he looked at me that he was bad news. He looked to be in his 40s and looked normal, but I couldn't stop the shivers traveling up my spine. He said hello, but all I could manage was a faint smile. I eventually decided I'd head back into the room, and as I was knocking on the door, the man was walking down the corridor to the elevators, but repeatedly looked back to look at me. From that point on, he seemed to be everywhere. In the dining room, at lunch, he would sit close by. At the pool, he would only be a few loungers along. A couple of times, I got in elevators only to have him run in behind me, even though I hadn't seen him around before I entered the lift. Luckily, even though I wasn't with my family, there had always been other people in the lift when he ran in. All he did was stand there and stare at me, and I would get shivers down my back. The first couple of days, I tried to ignore it. I had always gotten attention from boys. I tried to just brush it off as a bit of attention, but something didn't seem right, especially since the ship we were on was massive, and there were so many people on board. I began finding it hard to believe that he was just randomly bumping into me. We had told my mom and dad and the others about the argument in the other room from the first night, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything about the man following me. I felt embarrassed. Silly, I know. However, near the end of the week, I wanted to leave the pool and get changed to go watch a movie with my cousins. My sister wanted to stay at the pool, so I headed to the room by myself. When I got in the elevator with another few people, I noticed the man sneak in at the end, and all I could feel was dread as he stared at me. The other people on the lift got off at our stop, but went in another direction. As I walked down the corridor to my room, I could feel the man's eyes on the back of my neck. I quickly sped up and hurried into my room. A minute passed, and there was a knock at my door. Immediately, I knew it was him. There had been no one else in the corridor before. The knocks continued as I panicked on what I should do. I thought I would have to answer the door because he had watched me enter and knew I was in here. I answered the door, and the man had the creepiest smile on his face. "Hey, sweet thing, I'm locked out of my room. Can I come in to use your phone?" he asked. I knew he was lying. So quickly, I thought of something to get out of the situation. "Sorry, our phone isn't working," I said, as I tried to shut the door. "Oh, you're Scottish?" he asked in a surprised voice. I mumbled something in agreement, shutting the door, but he stuck his foot in. I decided to use all my strength and batter the door against his foot. He cried out in pain, but put his other foot in place. "Hey, I just need to come in for a minute," he said. I told him he should just go to reception and continue to try to shut the door. The panic was flooding through me. The next minute, I heard someone say, "Jess? What's going on?" With relief, I realized it was my older male cousin, Jonathan, coming by so we could go watch the film. "Who are you?" Jonathan shouted at the man. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were Scottish. I thought I knew your friend from back in the US, the guy mumbled. "It's just a misunderstanding." He hopped away and proceeded to enter his room. We left the next morning, and I didn't see him again. I will never forget that creepy expression he had on his face every time he looked at me. It makes me sick to my stomach.
My family and I went on a Christmas cruise right after I had turned 21. I should mention, I've always been young looking for my age, and people tend to believe I'm much younger than I actually am. Anyway, we got on the cruise ship, and we learned at dinner that the way meals work in that ship is that they're always served by the same person. Our server, in particular, was quite friendly, and made a point of talking to me and my 15-year-old sister. He didn't speak great English, but he always stopped us while we were on the ship whenever he saw us. My sister and I palled around with girls our age on the ship, and they also mentioned he talked to them quite frequently. I noticed that most, if not all, the servers and employees on the ship were foreign and spoke little English. I didn't think much of it, except that Carnival liked cheap labor and probably ripped these guys off. A few days passed, and on Christmas Eve, I got really sick and lay up in bed to skip the official dinner. I'm in there for a few hours when I got a phone call to me in my sister's room. I answered it, and someone in a muffled voice said, "Room service," or something like that. I said no, that we hadn't ordered anything, and the voice babbled for a second before saying something that sounded like chicken nuggets. After I got off the phone, I went back to sleep, not really creeped out as much as I was confused. It seemed perfectly ordinary. Anyway, my sister came back from dinner and got in bed after a while. After a few hours, we heard a knock at the door. At this point, it was about 2 a.m., and we had no idea who could be knocking at 2. Who could be knocking so early in the morning? So being the older one, I got up and answered it, thinking it could only be my mother and father at this time of night. Instead, it was a dinner server. I was standing in a long t-shirt that barely covered my crotch, and I just looked at him and couldn't say anything. He said, "Why weren't you at dinner?" And I said I was sick. He reached out. I responded that I was sick. He reached out to me, and I kind of took a step back so he couldn't touch me. At this point, he was talking. I didn't understand what he was saying, but he was stepping closer into the room. I realized that he was trying to come in, so I opened the door a little wider so that he could see my sister sitting up. And looking at him, I said, "My sister is here too," hoping that the idea of forcing himself on 2 people wasn't a great idea for him. He kind of stopped and smiled. As I was turning back to him, he reached out and grabbed my face, kind of stroking it, and kissed the corner of my mouth. I was sick, tired, and confused at this point, so I just kind of stood there, shocked and scared. I honestly went blank. Later on, my boyfriend asked why I didn't push him off or avoid him? Honestly, I don't know. I wasn't really thinking of anything. I was just scared. Anyway, he went off. The next day, I told my parents, and they were really angry and went to the ship's security office to have me give a statement. Eventually, we learned that he had left dinner after not seeing me there, located my room by calling the number listed by our names, and made plans to come by. He called our room to make sure it was me that answered so that he could get me alone. He wasn't allowed to be down there at all, since he wasn't cabin personnel. Ship security eventually took statements from other girls, which eventually led to him getting locked up. When I was about 15, I went on a cruise with my parents around Asia. One night, I was making my way back to the kids club. My mom insisted that I join so I could meet new people. It was around midnight, and since around 90% of the people on the ship were elderly, they were already in bed. So everywhere I went was empty. My cabin was on the lowest level of the ship, whereas the pool was on the top deck, so I had a fair way to go to get there. After waiting for one of the 6 elevators to open for 5 minutes, I got impatient and ran for the stairs. That was when I heard, "Are you running away from me?" I turned around, and a man who looked to be in his late 20s and dressed from head to toe in gray was grinning at me. Unsure of how to act, I gave him a slight smile and tried to keep walking, but he moved fast and blocked my path. He asked me all these questions like, "What's your name? How old are you? Where are you from? Why are you so uncomfortable around me?" But I managed to lie and say my parents were waiting for me, and before he answered, I walked away, then ran when I couldn't see him. At about 1:30 to 2, I said goodbye to my new friends and started to head towards the stairs again. And guess who I ran into? The man was coming up the stairs when I was about to go down. As soon as he spotted me, he grinned. He was purposefully blocking my way, and he offered to walk me to my cabin. At this point, my gut was telling me to get away fast. That was the second time I ran into him, and it was on the 2nd floor. I began to think that his cabin was on that floor and was worrying what he would do. Every time he said something, I replied with, "I have to go," and eventually, I could see he was getting angry. This went on for several minutes. More questions, more compliments, some touching, until I pushed him off. And he hit the wall beside us once when I wasn't giving him the answers he wanted, but then he took a deep breath and smiled at me. I was beginning to get really scared, so I turned around, ran through the glass doors behind me to the pool deck, and collided with one of the boys from the club. I began to panic, convinced he was coming after me. I was talking too fast and hyperventilating, and my friend had no idea what was going on. I turned around to point the man out, but he wasn't there anymore. I told my parents what happened, which led to my dad walking me to the club every night. My mom was determined to find out who he was, so she and I went to the little photo shop on one of the decks and looked through the mandatory photos that each passenger had taken before they got on the ship. He wasn't in a single photo. I never saw him again after that. It was as if he wasn't even on the boat. I still wonder what could have happened if I hadn't ran away and found my friend. If you enjoyed the previous stories and would like to hear more similar creepy stories, then 2 of my previous videos are linked to in the description and can also be seen by clicking the annotations on the screen. If you liked the video, please show your support by subscribing, liking, sharing, and commenting on the video. Additionally, if you'd like to hear more of my stories, please feel free to subscribe so that you will be notified of any new videos I post. Thanks for watching, and stay safe.